Will you join with me in saying our chalice lighting words? We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together. In this month, as we consider the question, what does it mean to be a people of blessing, I wanted to share this Taoist tale with you. And it's also a story, a parable that has been a grounding point for me, a balance point when I think of times of great change and turmoil. It goes like this. There was once in a village a man who had beautiful horses. And his finest horse, the prize horse of the entire village, one day ran off away from his house. And all of the other villagers, they came to this man and they said, "Oh, what terrible misfortune you've had. We're so sorry. How awful." And the man said, "Perhaps. But what seems like a curse may be a blessing." 3 days later, that horse came running back to his house, but with a whole pack of wild stallions, the most beautiful horses any of the villagers had ever seen. And so, of course, they all rushed over to him to congratulate him. By the laws of the land, those horses were now his. "Congratulations, what wonderful luck you've had. Isn't this an exciting, great moment for you?" The man said, "Perhaps. But what seems like a blessing may be a curse." And true enough, the next week, as his son was riding one of those wild horses, trying to teach it, tame it, he fell off and broke his leg. He could have died. Everyone came, of course. "Oh, how awful, we're so sorry." Perhaps. But what seems like a curse may be a blessing. And the next month, as the whole nation began to prepare for war, the king's men came through the village conscripting men for the war. And every young man from that village died in that war. It was a horrible war, except for the man's son, who couldn't go to war because of his broken leg. And so the people of that village to this day say, what seems like a blessing may be a curse. What seems like a curse may be a blessing. Welcome once again to our celebration of life. Will you rise in body or spirit, and we'll sing together "For All That Is Our Life," 128. Will you join me in a time of prayer and meditation, followed by a shared silence? Rest comfortably in your seat. Feel your feet on the floor, connecting you down to this good earth. your breath moving in and out. If prayer would do it. Poem by the hospice chaplain, Stephen Levine. If prayer would do it, I'd pray. If reading esteemed thinkers would do it, I'd be halfway through the patriarchs. If discourse would do it, I'd be sitting with His Holiness every moment He was free. If contemplation would do it, I'd have translated the periodic table to hermit poems, converting matter to spirit. If even fighting would do it, I'd already be a black belt. If anything other than love could do it, I've done it already and left the hardest for last. We gather with hearts full this morning. Our hearts contain multitudes. Some full with shock, with confusion, with uncertainty, perhaps outrage or anger, and also with hope, with determination, with care, with curiosity. The full range of our experience is welcome here today. Wherever you are, whatever you hold, if you pray, pray. If you contemplate, contemplate. If you meditate, meditate. If you simply rest, rest in that great love, that unending love that will not let us go. Rest in that love that holds each of us and all those we care about, all the leaders, all those affected in this great time of transition, held in that love. May the silence we have shared continue to hold and to heal us all. May it be so. Amen.
As a Unitarian Universalist preacher, it is an honor to preach on Mother's Day because there really is not a more traditional Unitarian holiday. How many of you are surprised? Did any of you know the history of Mother's Day? A few? Yes. It's incredible to me. We are a small but mighty denomination, but we have had a major impact in the world in a few ways, and Mother's Day is one of them. And the history has shifted to what we know of Mother's Day today, so I want to go back in time for a moment with you to 1858, when there was a community organizer in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. Her name was Anna Revis Jarvis. And she organized an event called Mother's Works Day. And it was during this time when there was incredible poverty and incredible challenges, particularly to sanitation in these rural mountain communities. And she organized mothers to come together to improve the hygiene and the public services offered in their rural communities. And this was the first sort of act that we can trace to being the origin of Mother's Day. And this act that she did was really part of this movement that was happening at the time to recognize women, and mothers in particular, as public figures, as people with political power and will to make change in their communities for the betterment of themselves and their families. So it was Julia Ward Howe, a Unitarian, the author of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, in 1872, who proposed an annual Mother's Day. She called it a Mother's Day for Peace. And Julia Ward Howe's project was really around abolishing war, abolitionism of war. And she had this idea that for women to take action, women were particularly impacted by the Civil War. They saw their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, their sons killed on both sides. And so Julia Ward Howe was very committed to this idea that mothers had a particular role to play in creating peace in our country. She wrote this: "Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender with those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs." And so for 30 years, starting in 1872, Americans celebrated Mother's Day for peace. And it is a holiday that has changed a bit in the 30 years since then. Recently, I was in Walgreens, and I was walking down the aisles, and I noticed these large pink signs that said, "Perfect for Mother's Day." And they were attached to different items in the store: the Hallmark greeting card section, the candy aisle. There was one attached to a big basket of purple pom-pom slipper socks. Moms love slipper socks, right? And so it is interesting to me that this has become the central point of our current Mother's Day celebration. It has an emphasis on gift giving, on celebrating and nurturing this idealized version of a mother. A mother in our popular mind frame is often someone who, when you say the word, what comes to mind is a woman in an apron baking cookies, or a woman bent over the stove with a baby on each arm. And yet, in our lived experience, we know that mothers and mothering is much more complex and much more broad than those images. And Mother's Day has a history that should be held up much more than purple pom-pom slipper socks. And yet, I find myself wrestling on my first Mother's Day, still with this image that looms large. This idea of mothers or of women as people who are constantly nurturing, endlessly giving, and willing to sacrifice everything for chocolate one day of the year. I'm not up for that. I don't think many of us are. Moms are so much more. We have opinions, needs, and expectations, and many of us have had the experience of our own moms crashing into the reality of their own limitations. And for some, this holiday is painful, a reminder of the ways in which we can all fall short of what we idealize. So it's true, moms aren't perfect, and surprise, surprise, their children aren't either. There is a way in which many of us have come to believe, and I think actually religion has unfortunately had a harmful role in this, that to be a good person or a good parent, we have to do everything right. The moral and ethical code that often gets held up is that doing more things right makes us more right, or make more good. For much of my own life, I have struggled with this thinking that if I just could be a little bit more perfect as a student or a daughter or a spouse, and now as a parent, then I would not suffer. That I would not have to face some difficult decisions. And so, in particular moments of high stress, I tend to have an increasingly high standard of myself. There is this aching pain, this great grief, in the moment when I brush against the wide gap between how I wish I was and how I wish the world was, and how it actually is. And my attempts to avoid this gap and this pain have led me to succumb too often to the demons of perfectionism. We live in a world that is very busy telling us that if we just did more, we would be better. If we earned more, if we bought more, if we helped more, if we gave more, if we said more, sometimes if we said less more, we would somehow be more. But the truth is, all of this thinking is toxic. It leads us to these impossible high expectations, to floods of self-blame and self-criticism. Each turn is a movement towards judgment and separation. It is this crumbling path that we can take as individuals and as communities that divides us. At the core of this pattern of thinking, more is better, is a dangerous ideology that what is, that who you are, is somehow not enough. In our tradition, what we hold central is that what is and who you are is enough. Right now, right as it is. This is what we mean when we say the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Every sad person, every funny person, every sick person, every strange person, every wounded person, every longing person, every young person, every old person, every lost person, every big person, every little person, every imperfect person. Every person. Slowly, over and over again, I've had to learn that perfectionism is not the bar, that it's not what life is asking of me. Life is asking me to show up, messy, here as I am. This is the real tough stuff, the soul work of being human, not to strive to be more and more perfect or better, but to strive to remember again and again that who I am right now is enough. Who we are right now is enough. The mantra I have developed to move forward when things seem confusing and uncertain, and I'm sure that it's not enough, is this: keep taking the next imperfect action. In this community at this time, there is a series of complex choices ahead. With Marcus and I's departure, with the recent news of Karin's resignation, there are many questions about what is enough and what will the future will hold. Through careful discernment, through connecting with one another, through sharing whatever is coming up, possibilities will emerge. There is enough. There is enough here, and there is a way ahead. Ministry and life really is this process of constantly tuning in to the inner voice, the place where we notice we are being called, as ministers love to say, where there is some spark of desire or interest or joy. And this sense of calling, oftentimes, I think we imagine it's like a booming voice over the speaker. But my experience of calling is that it is more like walking in a wooded path in the dark, with no map or sense of direction or smartphone, but maybe a small flashlight with dying batteries. You can only see one step at a time. And you don't know exactly all the turns and all the obstacles. But there is no perfectly laid out map. This congregation has a steady and strong spirit. This congregation has a mighty heart. This congregation has devoted caretakers. This congregation has a proud history. This congregation has an important role in this community. We have seen this congregation reach out to a transgendered young person. We have seen this congregation hold a family through suicide. We have seen this congregation come back again and say, no, this is not enough for our good green earth. This congregation knows how to survive and thrive and make do and make things happen. One more word about imperfect choices and the messes we can sometimes find ourselves in. Also about calling. This is a tender story for me to share, and it's a true story. After college, I worked when what felt like a calling for me at the time. I was a medical assistant at a family planning clinic at a Planned Parenthood in Portland, Oregon. And part of my responsibility was to work with women doing pregnancy tests, options counselings, and to be with women in times when they would choose to terminate their pregnancy. And I loved this work. For me, it was deeply meaningful. It was challenging, and at the end of the day, I had a sense that I was contributing by offering some sense of witness to these women's stories. And what happens in a family planning clinic is not what you see on television, right? The women I worked with were strong and courageous and smart people. And a wide variety of conditions had brought them to this clinic. A skipped pill, a lack of information, a lack of medical insurance. They, like everyone else I know, had run into a moment when they needed help. Abortion is a difficult topic, and we imagine that it always happens in the most desperate conditions, that it's always emotionally devastating, it's always the worst scenario. But my experience working with women has taught me otherwise. And I bring this to the pulpit on Mother's Day because it's important. Because it's a topic more frequently heard in conservative pulpits than in liberal ones. And really what we're here to say is that everything we're facing is part of who we are, and it's okay. There's something you will never hear a conservative preacher or politician say about abortion. The majority of women who terminate a pregnancy are mothers. Most women, that is 60 to 70% of the women who have abortions, are already mothers. They already have children and families. And the most common reason that mothers give when asked why they're making this decision is they see it as the best way to provide for the families they already have. Not a perfect action, but one made to move forward. A difficult choice, one that faces stigma and shame, and one that is made to care for oneself and one's family. This is the real rubber meets the road stuff of life. It is wrestling with conflict, with desire, with money, with choices, with the holy. And there is one patient I will never forget. She was in the clinic with her husband to terminate an 11-week pregnancy. I had met her just before she entered the surgical room, introduced myself as her advocate, someone who was there just to be with her. To hold her hand, to coach her breathing, to simply be present. I had no official medical responsibilities. She thanked me and lay down on the table, grasped her husband's hand and my hand. And as we were waiting for the doctor to come in, she started to hum. Her husband asked what she was humming, and she smiled softly, and she said, "It's Bridge Over Troubled Water" by Simon and Garfunkel. Her husband smiled at her and said, "Why?" "I don't know," she said. "It just came to me. It soothes me." At this point, the doctor came in and introduced herself. And the woman began to sing and hum softly again. Her husband started to hum along with her. And sensing the connection between this sweet couple, I also started to hum. And at this point, the doctor looked up at us, finishing her responsibilities. She too joined in on the chorus. I'm on your side. When times get rough and friends just can't pound, like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. Like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before. I felt God was among us. And it was in the most unlikely moment, when I did not have a sense of what was going to happen next, that I had this sense of being held. My invitation, my prayer is that we do not revere perfection, that we cease striving for sainthood, that we celebrate our wisdom hard-earned from our experiences, that we exercise the power of our choices, that we reach out to one another in times of uncertainty, that we find a soothing song, that we cross a bridge over troubled waters, that we know our divine gift is to discern, to choose, to act, and to sing together. Amen. Blessed be. Please join me in the chalice extinguishing words. Reach out, join hands, let no one be unconnected. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Interesting life you're going to have. Congratulations on the new job.
Thanks, Gigi.
Thank you for that. That was really helpful.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.